Uganda has passed new legislation that will criminalize anyone identifying as LGBTQIA+. More than 30 African countries have already gotten laws banning same-sex relationships, but Uganda's new law goes much further. For more on this, we're joined by Post-doctoral research fellow at the University of Johannesburg's Institute of Pan-African Thought and Conversation, Dr. Chidochashe Nyere. Dr. Nyere, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That we are seeing more than 30 countries on the continent continue with these laws should tell us what?
Good afternoon, Dudu, and good afternoon to the viewers. So what we are seeing is a resistance, particularly by African polities. And I do not necessarily want to be mentioning the names of the countries, but it's reflective of African values, if we want to put it that way. So we find that in most of these polities where homosexuality or LGBTI, to be politically correct, is prohibited, it's a reflection that borrows from cultural values of a place. Now, we may then want to say, in the case of Uganda particularly, their constitution was silent in terms of sexual orientation and sexual expression of anyone in terms of human rights. So the constitution was silent. But I think they are also being proactive, seeing developments elsewhere, particularly in Kenya, with the recent passing into law legalizing homosexuality. So Uganda, particularly the president, Yoweri Museveni, is on record castigating Westerners, because he blames Westerners and Western influence in African polities, and he blames them for imposing values that are un-African, if you like. So the issue of now putting it into law is to categorically state his position and his country's position, which he claims that borrows from traditional practices, from social beliefs of the Ugandan people. And therefore, when it's legislated, there is a law, there is a constitution that has then to be respected by all Ugandans in Uganda, and also all people, particularly the international community, as it recognizes Uganda as part of the international community. Now, whether or not it is a case of rule by law or rule of law, it is yet to play out, but as it stands, it has been legislated. So, in other words, homosexuality is illegalized in Uganda.
You speak of this being informed by African values and cultural values. History would tell us that this is nothing new for the African continent. When we speak of the LGBTQI community, we can trace it throughout history that there's always been an existence in terms of people sexual orientation not being linear. And so how then should we understand that in the context of these laws, which some very well argue are not even part of colonial laws, if you will?
I accept your question, and I want to bring an issue here. In terms of history, it's debatable whose history, right? And maybe we don't even have to get into whose history. But history and a history of a people has to adapt. And it always takes into consideration where a certain people has been to and where they are going. So in terms of trying to locate homosexuality in African history, it's neither here nor there, Dudu. And I say this with the utmost respect, because the going narrative, what is happening today, is what they are trying to say in this constitution. Because remember, this law has been enacted recently, and the claim is that it's informed by cultural values. So whether or not homosexuality has been in African history, it's really immaterial. The issue is the going narrative in terms of what the president has said and also what the legislature has said. So it's not only the president's voice here. It is the legislature of Uganda that has accepted this to say it corresponds with the values of the people of Uganda. And like I said, whether or not it is actually true, it's one thing. But in terms of what the law says, the law recognizes that the people of Uganda collectively, they do not recognize homosexuality and they do not encourage it. In fact, President Museveni is on record saying that, and of course he shares his personal experience and his personal views. But that does not then invalidate that, because he's speaking as a head of state, presumably after collectivizing in terms of thoughts and in terms of getting to understand where the Ugandan people want to be, given where they've been, and also given the developments in surrounding areas, particularly in Kenya.
You speak of the people of Uganda collectively not accepting homosexuality. How do we understand that, especially in the context on Monday? Actually, it wasn't on Monday, but 2 days ago, if my memory serves me correctly, we were speaking to a Ugandan who does human rights work around the issues of homosexuality. And he was pointing out, speaking to us anonymously, because his identity has been taken from him. So when we speak of the repercussions on an individual basis just because of somebody's sexual orientation, he was speaking to us anonymously, saying that, well, the people of Uganda, that's not what he sees on the ground. And so that would be debatable, that people of Uganda collectively do not accept homosexuality. And so what informs that?
So my pronouncements here are informed by the very fact that the legislature of Uganda has pronounced and enacted a law. So I'm speaking on the basis of the law. Right? In terms of the constitution of Uganda, it does not recognize homosexuality. However, when I say Ugandans speaking collectively, it does not necessarily mean there are no pockets of or sections of the population that sees the matter differently. Right? Personally, I also see the matter differently. But at the end of the day, we will want to speak to legislation in a country. And the very fact that it has been legislated and illegalized, there are consequences. And you would agree with me, coming from this context in South Africa, the Constitution is binding on everyone, whether or not it's favorable at a given point in time. That's also debatable. It's another issue. However, the bottom line is that once it has been legislated, right, it has been engrossed in the highest echelons of the state, which is then the Constitution. And therefore, every citizen, especially when they are in Uganda, they will have to abide by that law, right? Not to say there were differences in terms of how other people may perceive the law, but the law is the law, and in this case, it is binding, irrespective of what other people may feel about it, unfortunately.
Fair enough, but the law is also there to be challenged, especially when we speak of human rights. You cite South Africa's constitution, and it speaks of it protecting the rights of all who live in it as well. And so you've got various sectors of population, some people who, for instance, for now, if you speak about the issue of our courts being or hearing a number of cases. We know with the ZEP issue where people are going to court to challenge that. And so that is a human right issue, right? Or it's being dubbed as a human right issue. And so this too is a human right, a basic human right issue to identify as that which you choose to identify as. And so the law can be challenged, no, Doc?
That's correct. I totally agree with that sentiment. Yes, the law should be challenged, and in this case, it must be challenged. However, I want to hasten to say this. Let's remember here, the Constitution is for the people, and not necessarily the people for the Constitution. And I want to make that clarification so that we speak about one issue and we exhaust it and not entangle it with other issues. So the Constitution is for the people. In other words, when a constitution is made, there are a lot of consultations. And all those consultative meetings then have to come to an end where the majority decides. Remember, this is the era and age of democracy, in spite of its demons, and some have even quipped that democracy comes with democracy, and it's always there. The law will not satisfy everyone at all times. However, this is a new law, so let's allow it to be challenged within the courts in Uganda. Unfortunately, as you correctly stated, in terms of the person you spoke to, who did not want to identify him or herself for fear of repercussions, it will take time for the courts in Uganda to actually adjudicate on these matters, because they have been going on. But the constitution, the law was silent, right? So there wasn't a legislation that regulated homosexuality, right? There is no legislation that regulates the sexual orientation of people. And this it's a case of not having sufficient understanding of how laws are enacted. And again, let's understand that the current constitution or the current legal framework in terms of human rights in Uganda comes from a past. So there is a past where it was accepted, it was almost automatic that sexual orientation are binary. It's either you are male and you are female, and all these other intricate identities were presumed non-existent. So let's understand the history there. But going forward,
Dr. Nyere,
this is a new law.
Dr. Nyere, please, if you would allow us, just for the purpose of time, to take you here. So let's take a listen at the response from Washington.
We're certainly watching this real closely, and we would have to take a look at whether or not there might be repercussions that we would have to take, perhaps in an economic way, should this law actually get passed and enacted. And that would be really unfortunate, because so much of the economic assistance that we provide Uganda is health assistance.
Your thoughts on the possible repercussions if this bill is enacted?
So this was preempted. So this was expected. And I want to refer you to President Museveni himself. He's on record saying if the West would want to tie aid to us enacting laws that are favorable to homosexuality, they may as well take their aid with them. We don't need it. So I think that will be my reaction here, to say I think the Ugandan authorities were quite aware that there will be economic repercussions. And it is because of those economic repercussions that the president is on record saying the West should take their money and place it elsewhere. Uganda does not need such money. And I'm just saying this in order to showcase the fact that aid from the West normally comes with conditions that sometimes disturb and are unfavorable to African polities. And in this case, this is a classic example of what President Museveni was actually speaking to. We know that always when the West comes to influence a particular outcome, there are economic repercussions, whether in favor or in disadvantage of a particular polity.
You spoke of African values a little bit earlier on. What would those be?
In this case, let's look at Uganda. Let's look at what the president is saying. He said homosexuality, meaning be it a man who wants to be intimate with another man or a woman who wants to be intimate with another woman, it's unacceptable, right? I would not be the correct person to pontificate on all African values, but in this context, the president had set that standard, and therefore my pronouncements are based on those values that President Museveni speaks of, saying homosexuality is an African. Whether or not it is, it's a debate for a day.
Dr. Chidochashe Nyere from the Institute of Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you.